Hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And welcome to Expanding Accessibility with AI. And my name is Aaron Gustafson, and I'm a Principal Technical Program Manager in the Accessibility Innovation Group at Microsoft. I've also got an invisible disability as I am hard of hearing. And for those of you who can't see me, I am a middle-aged white man with glasses and what my wife refers to as a salt and paprika beard, red and gray, and long hair tucked behind these headphones of mine. And now I will hand it over to Ioana to introduce herself.
Hi, folks. So excited to be joining you all today. I'm Ioana Tanase. I am a colleague of Aaron's, and I work on the accessibility team as well as the Inclusive AI and Accessibility Program Manager. I too also have an invisible disability. I'm dyslexic, although I was diagnosed late in life. So my typos were a bit of a Schrodinger's cat for most of my life. I couldn't see them, but everybody else could. And for those of you who can't see me, I'm middle-aged, a Caucasian woman. I have blonde, longish hair that never looks like it's brushed despite my effort. And I'm wearing a black top with a gray sweater because it's chilly this time of the year where I'm at.
Amazing. And just fun fact, Ioana and I are birthday twins. So it's awesome to be presenting with her. So fantastic. All right, so let's get started. So I think the first question many people have coming into a session like this is, what exactly does AI have to do with accessibility? And I get it. Much of the focus has historically been on things like disease detection, weather pattern analysis, and such. But lately, the news is kind of dominated with generative AI and text, images, audio, and video that it's producing, deepfakes, and all of that. And while there are some very valuable uses of AI, I honestly think a lot of the headlines we see are flashy demos without a whole lot of substance. And to me, the real potential of these technologies are their ability to amplify human capabilities in a way that bridges the gaps that we've designed into our systems and our built environments that keep people with disabilities from being able to do the things that they want to or need to do every day. However, this scale is really a double-edged sword because it can absolutely amplify our worst biases and behaviors, which is something that Ioana will be talking about momentarily. So when I look at the current generation of AI systems, I don't see intelligence per se, or perhaps I should clarify, I don't see much in the way of independent intelligence. Current Gen AI systems are really predictive machines that are quite efficient at identifying patterns and repeating them, with a bit of variability thrown in just to keep their products from feeling monotonous. Now, I don't say this to disparage these systems. There's absolutely value in AI's ability to rapidly do mundane, repetitive tasks. These capabilities make it really well suited to supplement our own abilities and to fill the gaps between what we can do on our own and what we need to be able to do to accomplish our goals. Much like search engines did over the last 25 years, AI systems are enabling us to surface lessons we learned in the past and disseminate information at a scale and a speed that we've never witnessed before. It's not to say that they don't produce inaccurate information, because they absolutely do, but properly grounded and prompted systems can produce reliable enough results to help accelerate our own understanding of topics to solve problems, whether that's in code, in design, in writing, or otherwise. And unlike traditional user experiences, the improvisational nature of many of these generative AI systems is allowing us to move past software that's designed to empower people with disabilities to software that enables people with disabilities to design their own solutions and empower themselves on their own terms. So I'm going to take a look at a couple of examples here. So one of the first places that we started to see generative AI put to use was as a complement to image recognition systems for generating alternative text, for example. So this screenshot I have here is from PowerPoint giving alt text to a picture of some brownies. And it says the alt text it produced is a brownie with a glass of milk and a spoon. Now, if you're a sighted individual looking at this, you can actually see that it's not just a single brownie, it's actually an entire tray of brownies. It looks like they might have pistachios or something sprinkled on top of them. I don't know that that's a glass of milk. It almost looks like it could be cream or yogurt or something. It's got some cinnamon sprinkled on top of it. There's a lot more going on visually in this graphic than is really captured by that rudimentary alternative text. And historically, these results have been pretty crude. Crude is in a crude level of detail. But they absolutely are getting better. And so we're starting to see some of the image recognition models and some of the multimodal models able to very, very accurately detail what is being visually presented around them. We're also starting to see major improvements in the space of recognizing things like charts. So this is an example from a paper not too long ago about a chart called Chart Reader. And so they're using generative models to interpret and to translate complex images like charts in order to unlock the data that's held within them, which is a boon to people who are blind or who have other vision disabilities, but also to people who are unable to extract meaning from information-dense images for any reason. And I start to think, I look at this example. So this is a chart of Olympic medals, and the description that the generative AI system was able to pull from this was information about the medal counts that were being assigned to the different countries as part of the Olympics. So it says the United States has the highest total number of medals, followed by China, Russia, Great Britain. Japan has the lowest number of medals. Of gold medals, US has the highest number of medals and Russia has the lowest, so on and so forth. So there was a much bigger description that it was able to glean from this, reasonably dense chart. And then there's sort of one other thing on that is, like, I'm imagining a future where I can actually engage with a generative model that's able to reason over this chart, to ask it questions and really dive into the data in a way that I would with a human being who might be presenting this information to me, but without needing that human being to be, co-located with me or on a call with me or something like that. So I think there's a lot of potential in this space for me to self-serve, my own needs in terms of analyzing dense information like this. And then there are tools like Seeing AI, for instance, that help to translate the world around us to address the real-time needs of people who are blind and low vision. And I want to show a video of part of an episode of The Prompt with Trevor Noah that talks about how Seeing AI works and gives a brief example of that, because I think it's pretty profound.
With Seeing AI today, we have a bunch of different channels. So we've sort of defined some of the most common tasks like reading or just knowing what's around them. The long-term vision really is that the AI is going to learn about you as a human and understand what information to give you. But until we get quite there, we also let the user, switch between these channels of information.
This is amazing. Well, if you're ready, I'm excited to try out the technology.
So I'm going to take a photo.
Okay.
Over on the side.
The image depicts a film or video production set outdoors. In the foreground, a man is holding a camera mounted on a stabilizer rig. To the left of him, another man is standing next to a large circular reflector or diffuser, which is mounted on a stand.
Hey, wait, I guess we're on camera. But if I want to get more info about this, describe the background of the image. And now it's like I'm having a chat with the AI.
There are several trees with green foliage, suggesting a park-like setting. Behind the trees, a modern building with reflective glass windows is visible. There are some outdoor structures, such as a gazebo or canopy, and various pieces of equipment related to the film or video production set.
Now, that's amazing to me, that we have systems now that can enable blind people to get rich, detailed description of what's going on around them. Whether it's experiencing a famous location like the Grand Canyon or something like that, or whether it's looking for a particular medicine in a pharmacy. This is an incredibly powerful and empowering tool for people to do what they need to do throughout their daily life. So that's in the image description and sort of descriptions of what's going on in the world end of things. The next use case I want to share is with respect to adaptive content. So AI is enabling us to take what exists and make it more usable to us in our own context. And a great example of this is using a language model to distill a long document into maybe key points or takeaways. This can be very helpful for people with dyslexia, people who are cognitively taxed, as well as people who, there's just never enough hours in the day, right, to be able to digest the amount of information we're asked to, whether it's in our personal life or whether that's in our work life. Similarly, we can use AI to adapt our content into plain language. We can ask it to take dense documents, like this is an example of using Copilot within Edge to digest a PDF document, which happens to be the chart reader paper I mentioned earlier. And I can ask questions about this PDF document. It's not even a web page, but it is instead a binary file. And I'm able to extract information out of there, get key points, key takeaways, and stuff like that. So AI can also take this and adapt complex legalese into plain language, which helps civilians and people who are low literacy have access to information that they may not otherwise have access to. It also helps convert existing materials into other modalities, such as transferring something from being written to being audio and so forth. And while we're still getting used to the idea of having light and dark modes on our devices, AI can certainly take things even a step further and enable us to adapt the colors of documents and charts and other sorts of things in order to make them more accessible to us as individuals. Now, taking it again a step further into another use case, adaptive input. So AI can be immensely helpful in this space when it comes to input. Now, we've had speech-to-text systems for quite a long time, some better, some worse, but that's been a tremendous boon for people with mobility disabilities who can't type, for instance. And with the growth of AI in these systems, which are in virtually every OS these days, these are becoming more and more powerful tools for people with disabilities. Certainly being able to control your laptop or your desktop computer, being able to control your phone via voice, being able to control parts of your home using your voice through some sort of speaker system, like I have the Echo speaker pictured here. And then there are projects like the Speech Accessibility Project, which is a collaboration between Amazon, Apple, Meta, Google, and Microsoft, that's actually working to improve these speech recognition systems for people who have impacted speech, such as people with Down syndrome or Parkinson's or cerebral palsy, ALS, and stroke. And these AI speech-to-text tools are helping people show up as themselves and be more easily understood by their loved ones, by their caregivers, and by others. And while we often think of generative AI as an output, it's also an amazing tool for input as well, enabling people with disabilities to express themselves clearly with fewer steps, as Ioana will share in this next video. Oops.
One of the things that is challenging when you have dyslexia is writing. So to help with that, I will ask Copilot to write a draft email. I'm going to ask it to still keep my tone because I want it to sound like me, and I want it to be short, asking Mary to do a pre-read of the document.
Entering a prompt.
And it's now generating a template email, which is short and sweet, which is a brilliant productivity enhancement for me.
All right, and the final use case I want to talk about is improved communication. AI really enables people with disabilities to show up as themselves and to communicate in an authentic way. It's enabled us to build better augmentative and alternative communication tools, or AAC tools, as they're also known. Ones that aren't as physically taxing in terms of having to move your eye around, perhaps, to select items that you're using to compose a sentence. That's also mentally taxing and exhausting to use to find the right symbols that you might need to use. So all of this can reduce the amount of time that it takes to have conversations, whether that's with our loved ones, with a medical professional, with work colleagues and such. So lots of real goodness there. And then finally, AI is giving people without speech the ability to communicate in an authentic way, whether it's through high quality AI-driven synthetic voices or custom-made voice clones of people who could speak before a disease like ALS made it impossible for them to continue doing so. And we've been working with Team Gleason, which is an ALS support organization, to do that very thing, using some of our synthetic speech tools to create high quality AI voices that are clones of people's original voices. And I'd like to share a video to demonstrate the impact that this AI is having on one family's life.
Brian is somebody everybody should know. He's just witty and funny and likes to tell a lot of jokes, a lot of dad jokes.
I used to bite my nails, but thanks to ALS I don't anymore. My name is Brian Jensen. I was born and raised on the outskirts of New Orleans. I married my amazing wife in 2003. We have created a beautiful family of 7.
Around 2019, Brian started having some issues with his ankle. I was able to get him an appointment with a doctor, and he was like, I hate to tell you, but this is ALS. We were definitely not ready. Like, my heart hurt for him being so caught off guard.
For those people who haven't experienced ALS, you don't wish it on your worst enemy. It's a neurodegenerative disease that essentially stops sending signals from your brain to the rest of your body, to the point where you lose your ability to use your arms, or your legs, your voice.
My voice was my superpower. I am a conversationalist, so my voice weakened over a year's time, and the whole year was filled with sorrow.
We might joke like, oh, I hate the sound of my own voice. But in reality, your voice is your personality. It creates an actual emotional auditory event in the brain of your loved one.
My voice was the scariest thing to lose, more than eating and even breathing, because I knew there were fixes for those things. But my voice, how would I live in a world where my kids wouldn't be able to hear me say, I love you?
Over the course of somebody's progression, one thing that they can do to be proactive is preserving their voice.
One of the challenges with voice banking in and of itself, because it creates a computerized version of their voice, is that it doesn't have a lot of emotion and tone. So with what Microsoft is doing, their voice banking technology really gives someone back that intonation and a little bit more of their personality.
There's just something intimate about hearing his voice, his little quirks. I'm just excited to really just hear him.
Any technology that can get my voice as close to normal, well, that is a gift not just to me, but to my whole family.
So, Brian, today we're gonna play like a newer version of your voice. And I'm hoping when you hear this, and when you hear this, it's gonna remind you a little bit more of what he sounded like beforehand. So you just choose any phrase and then I'll play it on here as well.
Hey beautiful people, I am so happy to be with all of you.
All right, I'm gonna type it out.
Hey beautiful people, I am so happy to be with all of you.
Dang.
Hey Christy, I love you.
Oh my goodness. I can't believe that, really. Like, that's really crazy.
The biggest opportunities when it comes to emerging technologies is the gap that it can fill, not just here for people with ALS, but you think about anybody whose speech is affected. AI has the ability to increase communication, increase independence. It's the next wave for accessibility.
Here at Team Gleason, we have a phrase, no white flags. From my experience working with individuals living with this disease, that really means that they will not give up who they are.
I am completely in awe and amazed by this voice. I think this sounds just like me, and I am overwhelmed with joy that my family gets to experience this part of me. In many ways, I feel like I am back.
Tears every time. So I apologize that for some reason the captions did not show up on there. So I apologize for that. I'll make sure that those are in the final cut of the video of this. And I'll share a link to this as well, so you can watch the captioned version. So as you can see, AI absolutely has the power to exponentially improve our lives. But that same compounding power can do real harm if it's not managed properly. You know, a great synthetic virtual voice clone for Brian is amazing, but that same technology in the hands of somebody who's looking to do harm through use of deepfakes and stuff like that could be terrible. So we really need to be considerate of how it is that we're building these systems, how we're thinking about these systems, how we're designing these systems. And I'm going to now hand it over to Ioana to talk about our responsibility when it comes to developing AI systems. Ioana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And you cued this perfectly in terms of my example. And I start always with this somehow rhetorical question of what is responsible AI? And chances are, as many people you're going to ask, you're going to get slightly different variations of the same answer, or even different answers altogether. But the example that Aaron has given you, right, we're talking about how can we use natural voices or custom neural voices in order to empower those who have a condition such as ALS to regain that part of their personality. Incredibly empowering. At the same time, if that technology is not properly doesn't have a proper gatekeeper, and is suddenly just available for everybody to use, could also cause extreme harm in the society. And I have on the screen 2 newspaper articles, one talking about the positive effects, and one giving an example where back early this year, there were a lot of cases of AI voice scams and police warning of AI voice scams, where open source tools were basically cloning voice of people and pretending to them in order to extort their family out of monetary amounts. So same exact technology, 2 very different scenarios. If we can go to the next slide, please, Aaron. With that question of what is responsible AI, it has to start with principles, right? We have to have a common understanding, a common framework to say, this is what responsible AI means to us. And at Microsoft, we have a series of principles when we talk of responsible AI. First of all, we deeply believe that AI has to be fair. And you might ask yourself, what does that really mean, AI being fair? Well, it shouldn't have a different quality of service depending on who you are. So for example, does it work as well for me as it does for Aaron, as it does for somebody else? Also, if it's an AI system that has decision-making in terms of resources, does it unfairly discriminate against certain category of people? Also equally important, is there a risk of the AI system to stereotype, to generalize, or even to erase a whole category of people in its representation? It's really important to have considerations about what is fair in terms of that AI system. It also has to be reliable and safe. It goes without saying, and you've heard the example of the same technology being used in different ways. It has to be private and secure. Ultimately, you have to understand how is your data treated, where does your data go, and you need to ensure that the AI system that you're using puts those things at the center. Our team also works very deeply on what we call the inclusiveness pillar. Basically, we're thinking here of accessibility compliance. We're thinking of how all the products that we produce should be accessible to people with disabilities, irrespective of their disability. And ultimately, it also has to be accountable and transparent. And there's increased focus on the transparency beat, because as you're interacting with the system as a user, you should be in full control, but you also should know that, for example, you are interacting with the AI system. You don't confuse it with a person. You don't associate emotion in interacting with that system. All those things also protect your well-being, your emotional well-being, and ensures that you are in control and knowing of what is happening. Next slide, please. So as we think of these principles, there are real world effects of them, good and bad. And when the principles are not in place, we can see a lot of potential for bad. There was an article earlier this year that I have print screen in the preview and on the screen that says humans absorb bias from AI and keep it after they stop using the algorithm. So for example, if the AI system has a bias against people with disabilities, and I'm making things up, but says that, hey, people with dyslexia like me don't read or don't like to read. And said system produces that output for you, you might internalize that bias and you will keep it long after you have stopped using that particular AI system or algorithm. So it's really important not only that they're accurate, but they don't perpetuate those biases. Because, by the way, the myth of dyslexia and reading is just that. It's a myth. It's a personal preference. There's another screenshot on this particular slide. It's a preview from a French article, actually. My French is not yet very good, but it talks about access for a person with a guide dog to a particular store. And the image that they use for this particular article is AI generated, but it's also very inaccurate. In this particular portrayal, the person who is meant to be blind is wearing a blindfold, which is not an accurate depiction of those who are blind or low vision and using a guide dog. Furthermore, the guide dog says security on it, which is not a depiction that the guide dog has in real day life. If we go to the next slide. So, okay, we have risk, but we also have a lot of opportunities to ensure that our AI systems are inclusive and are safe, and we're putting those principles at the core of everything we produce. So whether you are somebody who's making technology or you're somebody who is a technology user, I want you to be really, really focused on what you're using and what goes into it. So we have a responsibility as technology makers, but also as consumers, to understand deeply the systems that we interact with. The way to think of mitigation. So if we are producing something that is a generative AI system, how do we ensure that it's safe? Well, first of all, it starts with the model. You don't need frontier models for all of your use cases. You might need a small language model, or you might need something that is multimodal, and so on and so forth. So choosing the right model plays a huge part in terms of your use case and making sure that you're right sizing as well. Then we have, if you imagine a box within a box within a box, the bigger box from the next stage is called a safety system. Here we think of things like, are there particular words that we want to block and make sure that our system never produces? Are there particular types of images that we don't want the system to produce because they can cause, for example, copyright, or they can be stereotypical or harmful depiction of disability, if we were to talk about disability. All those things come into this layer of what do we want to make sure we have blocked and what type of variation do we allow for in our system. And you might ask, but why do we even allow variation? Well, because ultimately it depends on the use case of the system. So let's say that we have a dial for something like violence. If our particular use case is educational, we want to make sure that is dialed right down to 0. If we're creating a game that has a certain element of violence in it, then we're going to allow for some of it, but not all of it, and so on and so forth. Then the other box on top of the model and the safety system is called system messaging and grounding. Grounding means, hey, we're using this big model, but I actually wanted to just refer to one category of data or resources. And at Microsoft, in the accessibility team, my colleagues actually develop a system which is called Ask Microsoft Accessibility. So anybody who has questions on our website about different aspects concerning accessibility can go and interact with that system. And it is grounded, or it pulls from all of our documentation and knowledge. So it's very clear that, hey, this is the scope of the system, and this is where I'm pulling from. There's also something called a system message. And think of it as a short or longer instruction that you're giving your system. It tells it, this is your purpose, this is what you're meant to do, and equally important, it tells it what it's not meant to do. So if we're thinking of disability, we might instruct it that it has to use always an inclusive language. We instruct it that it never should talk about disability in a derogatory way or ableist way. So all the instructions that come into here tells your model what's its purpose, how it should behave, and how it shouldn't behave. And then finally, we have the user experience. And here it's also about the system. Is it produced accessibly? Are people going to have a great usability experience when they're interacting with it? But also back to the earlier point of transparency, do they know that they are interacting with the AI system and making sure that they're not confusing it with an actual human? And the way to think of all these mitigations, they're not silos. It's not one versus the other. You have a cohesive way of bringing them all together. And as a sum, this is what makes your system what it is. And we will share resources, but if you're wanting to learn more about system messages, we do have on Microsoft Learn a specific category which is called Safety System Messages. And you can go there to learn more about the system message in particular. Okay, if we go to the next slide. You'll have homework. This is your first homework. I can't promise it's going to be the only one. First of all, if you're developing products, think of what are your responsible AI practices. Have a deep conversation within your organization if you don't already have a framework, and decide what is core to what you're trying to do. And as a bonus point, you should involve people with disabilities in the full life cycle of your product, including responsible AI. Your products are only going to be as good as you have representation of human identity as a whole. So it's really important to make sure that people with disabilities are engaged meaningfully across all of those stages. And again, we have a resource on this page, which we'll make sure to get to you, but you can also learn more about how empowering responsible AI practices at Microsoft and how we do it. If we go to the next slide. Now, what's next? We talked a little bit about what is available today, what the potential is. This technology is still growing. The opportunities for the disability and accessibility space are still evolving. So what are the particular things that make me very excited? Well, if we go to the next slide, there's a lot of things that we know we still have opportunities for. And these are either trends or they're things that we have not yet solved. And they're very big thought processes and issues to solve. One of the trends that is coming and will be here for all of 2025 are something called agents. So we are evolving from, let's say, the experience that you might have with using technology like a Copilot, either standalone or one of Microsoft's products, to agents. So agents, think of them as technology that is able to take items and do them independently on behalf of you. So for example, let's say that I want to book a plane ticket to go to London. In theory, an agent will be able to know what are my travel preferences, will have access to my preferred airlines, traveling time, will know if I need certain accessibility requirements at the airport and so forth, and will be able to book that on my behalf. As we're thinking of accessibility scenarios, this gets me really excited because there are plenty of things that, as somebody who has a disability, I know I can use that support in. So this is definitely an area that is up and coming. So the bigger question is, what are opportunities to really automate current non-accessible experiences as well? We know that most of the world's websites are not accessible. Are there opportunities to use something like an agent in order to make sure that we do have access to those? And let me just say something. This is not an excuse to make your websites not accessible. They should be. So one does not replace the other, but there are opportunities to ensure that on the short term, as we have a Band-Aid, that can be a potential Band-Aid. Another trend, and this is probably a little bit further thinking, is generative UX. So as we think of UX, can generative UX become a personalized experience? In using the same type of product, can my generative UX be adjusted to my needs, my preferences, my disability, versus Aaron's might have a whole different experience based on his. Again, that customization, that personalization is something that's coming into play as a future trend and opportunity. Now, one of the hard challenges as an industry has to do with how we think of sign language. And the reason I say that, currently there is no text to sign, sign to text, or speech to sign, or sign to speech AI models that exist fluently, cohesively, completely across any of the sign languages. We don't have that as a society. And thinking of, can AI help with that? And are there ways in which we have a model that translates text to sign or from sign to text is really exciting. And there's a lot of research happening, and there's progress in different pockets of that, but we don't have a cohesive model in place. So this is something that is definitely a future opportunity and something to look forward to in terms of research. And last but not least, and most people, when I say this, they're like, opportunity, really? Policy and legislation. This does get me excited. We do have a lot of legislation coming up. One is in my side of the world, I'm based in Europe, the UAI Act, which is coming into effect starting February, and talks about what are the use cases of AI and how we should think holistically of the risk and mitigate those. We have the European Accessibility Act as well next year. In the US alone, in 2024, there were over 400 AI bills proposed. And you might say, but wait a second, how does legislation help with innovation? Well, it does, because I'm a strong believer that policy and legislation does not stiffen innovation. It allows it to be responsible, and it allows it to actually be more inclusive of people that otherwise would not have been considered part of the process. And if we go to the next slide, we talked about innovation, and Aaron talked about AAC. One of the companies that is doing a lot of innovation in this space is a company called Seaboard. And if you imagine the experience that Aaron told you about, where somebody who uses eye gaze and has to select certain simple symbols in order to construct sentences. For example, let's say I have a symbol for I have a symbol for run, and then I have a symbol for bathroom. That is my sentence, I run bathroom. A company called Seaboard has taken AI in order to ensure that the sentences that the user produce, one, are personalized to them and sound more natural as everyday speech. So they're using Azure OpenAI in order to piece together the symbols in order to create cohesive sentences that are personalized for the user. So in the case of the example I gave you of I run bathroom, this might generate variations that are custom to the user, but say I have to run to the bathroom, or I have to go to the bathroom quickly. And the user has the opportunity to continue to influence and adapt to their particular preferences. Another example, and this is based out of India, a company called iWill. There is a huge opportunity around mental health. We simply do not have enough medical care and medical providers to, in order to be able to treat all the demands from a mental health perspective. So a company in India is tackling this, and they created an app which is called iWill Kita, which is in Hindi because that is the majority of their customer base. And they are leveraging generative AI in order to expand mental health healthcare. What is really the very important thing here is their app is grounded in actual research, in actual medical care. They're working with professionals who have years of experience in terms of providing medical health from a mental health perspective. So this is grounded in science and practices that specialists have developed and support for mild to moderate cases of anxiety and stress, very, very deeply in terms of the cultural context as well. But also at the same time, the app has an ability where somebody who has, let's say, something more severe is already put in touch with a specialist. So it pieces together the need for mental health, where it is appropriate for the person to engage with this type of system. And then it also makes sure that the person has access to a medical professional if that is the case. So these are two of my favorite examples in innovation when it comes to generative AI. And if we go to the next one, I want you all to think of how you can innovate in this space. And a broader version of this framework is available on aka.ms/innovation toolkit. Our team developed it, so if you have questions, I'm volunteering both myself and Ioana to respond to them, so you can message us. But as you're thinking of your innovation journey, one, try to connect with your passion. Here's the thing. Most of us will develop a disability during our lifetime or know somebody who has a disability. Try to think of what the opportunity is and connect with it from a passion perspective. Then the next step is identify the wave. And the way to think of the wave is to think of a theme. It might be that there's new legislation coming up, which has certain consequences from a technology perspective. Or it might be that we have an unmet need in the market, which we have plenty of, clearly. So think of what are the opportunities, and oftentimes you can relate to yourself when it comes to thinking of those waves. Then think about your customers. Who are your potential customers in that space? Remember when I told you to involve people with disabilities across all your product lifecycle? This applies here as well. Employ people with disabilities, co-create with them. It's incredibly important to have that lived experience. So one of the mottos is in the disability space is nothing about us without us. And it is fundamental because that lived experience is a key differentiator. Then develop your vision statement. And lastly, validate your prototype or solution with the people who this is meant for. Go to the innovation toolkit to read more. And as you're developing your own journey here, make sure to let us know. And then if we go to the next slide, we promise resources. These are a few resources that you can access today. You can learn more about Microsoft accessibility. You can get your accessibility fundamentals badge. So if you're new to accessibility, that's fine. We're a cool crew. Join us. We have fantastic training dedicated to get you started. And remember, this is a journey. I'm learning still every day, and I make mistakes every day. So join this journey. It's a fun one. Then you can explore Copilot scenarios that this is a series of videos produced by our colleagues who have disabilities and are using Copilot in everyday scenarios. And lastly, if you need technical support, we have a fantastic resource, aka.ms/edad, where you can go and ask for technical support for Microsoft products. And with that, we thank you. And I'll ask Aaron to join me back for potential questions.
Wonderful job, Ioana. Thank you.
Did we have any questions in the chat window? I admit I wasn't monitoring when presenting.
Yeah, no worries. I did see one question that came through from Salman Chishti. What are the approaches to tackle propagation of uncertainty or bias with RLAIF or RLHF? Do you want to speak to that one, Ioana?
Yeah, it really depends on the type of bias. And it also depends on where you're starting in the journey and if there's already resourcing in place or not. I'll give you some of the snippets of our own journey with disabilities. We have to start with, I'm going to take a step back and not even go in terms of how you do the mitigations, but where do you even start? You have to start with understanding what is bias in that space, what is accurate depiction of disability, what is inaccurate or offensive or stereotypical depiction of disability. So you have to take a step back and really do research and involve the community, understand what are ways in which people want to be portrayed and what are ways in which people don't want to be portrayed or absolutely should not be portrayed because they're highly offensive and stereotypical. Then you have to think holistically of okay, we have an understanding, we have a basis for everything we want to do. It's community-led, it's community-involved and community-informed. How do we ensure that that applies into product? And there you have to think of, first of all, if you start with nothing, how do you measure if bias exists or not? And there are different ways to do so in text environments versus image environments versus multimodal. And from there, once you have a baseline of understanding of this is where we're starting in terms of the issues or opportunities, depending how you see them, then you think holistically of what your mitigations are. And there's a lot to be said in that area, and I'm happy to have a more in-depth conversation and share some resources, but it is a holistic approach. We can't just focus on a little bit of it, because then we're missing the bigger picture.
Yeah, great answer, Ioana. From my end, I think the only thing I'd add to that is data. Like making sure that the data that we're starting with is actually representative of people with disabilities, and not that we are hoovering up that data from any data source that we could find, but we're actually being intentional about how we're bringing that data in, that we're compensating individuals with disabilities for contributing to our data sets. All of that is super important, because we always go back to the concept in technology of garbage in, garbage out, and it's the same thing with these AI models, but amplified. So it's like it's like the reverse of a black hole, right? We're sending in this thin stream of stuff, and then it's just exploding into a huge mass of different modalities and different ways of interacting and different interactions and such. So we need to be really thoughtful about what we're feeding into that machine.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, Aaron. One of the things we know as a whole, people with disabilities are not, if you think of how many people have disabilities and what that portrayal is in society in things like advertising, media, movies, etc., the percentage is so small in terms of disability representation that it's not correlated with the actual disability experience as a whole. So we know that we are starting from a very small place of accurate disability representation and a lot of disability misrepresentation. So the point that Aaron made becomes extra important, so to say, knowing that we're starting from, we're missing a lot of data.
Yeah, wonderful. One comment from Michael that I think probably you agree with as well. Worried about people with low level of digital literacy who want to be able to enjoy these AI tools, who are maybe locked out from doing so. Totally echo that. I think we need to have a lot of training in schools and in workplaces and such into how to engage in these tools, what they're good for, what they're not good for. I think there is some good work happening at a couple of universities, teaching students, how these various generative tools can be wonderful improv partners for bouncing ideas off of each other. I've certainly found usefulness in understanding that I don't want the model to come up with facts or help me find facts for something. I have other ways of doing my research, but it can help me a lot with, keeping me honest from an editorial standpoint to, make sure that I'm not writing above my target reading level or those sorts of things. And I think having more education for folks in that regard to help them understand where these tools really shine, where there are risks, how to, validate the output. But I would say the same thing of people struggle with those issues with search engines too. So a lot of that same stuff.
And at the same time is as technology makers simplifying the experience, right? And there's a fantastic organization called the Zero Project. They're developing something AI-based, which will be announced soon, which I'm not able to share too much about. But one of the things they have done from the get-go is have an accessible experience, but making sure that their interactive chatbot has a plain language option. It's the first toggle that you see when accessing that, and it says plain language. And that's because they wanted to ensure that the experience they offer their users is inclusive by design. So there are things that we can do as technology makers as well. And it's a pairing from the point that Aaron mentioned in terms of how do we bring people along the journey, but also how do we make sure that the journey is not so complicated that people simply tune out because it's too complex. So I think it's an end between those two.
Wonderful. Another question from Cintura, hopefully I pronounced that correctly. With the world moving towards AI scoring and automated assessments, how do we make it an equitable experience for people with disabilities? Do you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to read at the same time, folks. I have an auditory processing disorder, so I have to read it as well. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so as we're thinking of, and I guess, Sindra, if you can clarify in the chat window, great. If not, I'm going to do my best to kind of give a comprehensive result. Are we talking automatic assessment and scoring when it comes to measuring risk or measuring harms, or are we talking of the deployment of those systems? Because they're two different things, and I'll do my best to kind of respond to both. And Aaron, if you're leaning towards one.
I feel like it's the second. I feel like it might be in terms of like loan applications, in terms of, assistance applications, those sorts of things. I don't know.
Go for it.
So I think one of the key things, regardless of what it is that you're building, what sort of systems that you're building, I think transparency and auditability is really going to be key. And to be able to have the systems that we're designing be designed and supervised in partnership with people from disability communities, people who represent people with disability communities. So, maybe it's legal partners who work with disability communities, those sorts of things, to ensure that that systems are not being built in such a way that they are imposing bias upon that. But at the same time that they are auditable and adjustable if biases or when biases are discovered, in order to ensure that that it's not tipping the scale and amplifying a human bias. And it looks like she chimed in with some clarification on measuring scores of assessment. So do you want to take that?
Yeah, when we're actually measuring for biases in our AI systems, there is a multitude of ways to do it. First of all, yes, you have automatic measurement, but at the same time, you also have manual measurement and manual testing. So first of all, think of testing holistically. Don't think of it just automatic measurement. We've applied this filter, we've done this measurement, and we're done. It's important that you have, depending on the use case, depending on your product, you have a way of thinking of what type of test we can do, manual, automatic, human reviews. And there is a reason why I think it's the last 18 months, we have seen calls from the likes of OpenAI where they have asked for human expertise for specific domains in order to be able to test their systems ahead of them being widely available. So human expertise is still very much part of testing and should be there. There is automatic measurement as well. So how can you pair the two and make sure that you have robust ways of doing both? And how do you make sure that you take the learning from the first one and apply it to the other? There's multiple ways in terms of automatic measurement to detect potential biases. In text-to-text, for example, you have to start with something called a lexicon, which is a list of, in our case, disability-related terms, and it includes medical disability terms. It includes inclusive ways of referring to disability. It includes offensive ways of referring to disability, metaphors, and so on and so forth. So once you have that robust lexicon that, again, is research-led, community-informed, you're able to add things like automatic measurement where you can detect, are those terms present? How are they present? What is the likelihood of this interaction being biased or not? But you always, even with automatic measurement, have a human that reviews those results. So don't just take automatic measurement as pass. No, go into the details and say, what are the interactions? What is the output? Because you will have false positive, you will have false negative. So understanding those and adjusting also your measurement is very important.
Wonderful. I think another thing just to add on the measurement piece is, I think a lot of times there is a tendency when viewing disability and testing for disability stuff to test for a certain disability in a silo. And I think we also need to be really aware that we need to test at the intersections of disabilities, because that's where you're going to find all sorts of issues in terms of the way the systems are designed, because a lot of times they have been thought of in that very focused way on a particular disability, but maybe it doesn't work well when it's intersecting a mental health condition with a vision disability or a mobility disability or something like that. So I think really building your measurements in your test cases against those more complicated or complex interactions is going to help you get better results overall. So yeah, don't be afraid to get overly specific and create really complex scenarios to test against.
Absolutely. We have another question that says, from Sarah, any suggestion on how to include people with disabilities if they're not represented in the long-term data sets where training data is being pulled from? Do you want to talk about the speech accessibility project as an example?
Yeah. So I would say the simple answer is ask. Reach out to people with disabilities, reach out to organizations that are run by people with disabilities or that work to support people with disabilities in various disability communities, and talk to them about what's missing from the data sets that you need access to. And that is in fact what we've done with the speech accessibility project that I mentioned earlier. So this is a consortium that involves a bunch of different tech companies who all identified this need for more disability data when it comes to impacted speech. And so we are working with a neutral third party, which is the University of Illinois. And they are managing the data collection, handling all of the necessary payments and that sort of stuff, and creating a more inclusive data set that we can then use to train and improve our models. And we're already seeing that yielding results, some pretty impressive results. I'll drop a link into the chat shortly that kind of talks through some of the stuff that Azure Speech has found in terms of improving our own models based on that. But really, it comes to working with these organizations. And so the way that this has worked is, all of these tech companies are working with the University of Illinois. University of Illinois is then reaching out to support organizations for people with Parkinson's, for people with ALS. And those organizations are working with their communities to not only identify people to contribute to that data set, but to take care of paying them, to take care of all of the necessary training, whatever hardware is needed to capture that data, all that sort of stuff. So really, partnership is how we scale this sort of thing. If you're working on a smaller project, a smaller team, a project at a university or something like that, reaching out to individuals or small campus groups, that sort of thing, could be a way to start to supplement that information if you're not at the point where you can do kind of those large scale outreaches. Ioana?
And Aaron has you mentioned this earlier, but make sure you compensate people with disabilities for their time. So if you're doing research, please pay them. If you're involving them and having data that they're contributing to, make sure that there's a value exchange. That is fundamental, and it's incredibly important. We have a question from Tiffany. I think it comes as a follow-up to the point you made, Aaron. Complex disabilities are hard for clinicians to solve for and support. What kind of experts are involved in solving for some of those challenges Aaron just talked about?
It's a great question. I think it's something that we're still coming to grips with, and I can imagine a scenario where we begin to use well-grounded AI systems to help us find those complex solutions, because you have different camps who have their specific knowledge, whether it's speech language pathologists who really understand what they need to do to support somebody with ALS, for instance, who has lost use of their voice, and you've got other people who are focused on mobility, and other people who are focused on blind and low vision, and really getting them to talk, first of all, is sort of an ideal scenario. But if that's not something that is feasible, being able to bring together their respective areas of knowledge and bring those to bear on a problem, just ends up creating so much better solutions that end up working for people in a greater variety of scenarios.
And I know we're close to time, but we have one more question from Beatriz, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly. They mentioned, for me, the next level of complexity is the global world we live in, how to reduce bias and gather data across different countries, cultures, and including multi-language disability relevant data. Most of research is done in English, and it always takes time to adapt across cultures and languages. 100%. I was reading your comment and nodding to myself, and probably nodding out loud as well. This is incredibly true. And you just made the point. There's cultural nonsense, there's language nonsense, and I gave the example of iWill and the fact that their mental health CBT chatbot is in Hindi, and that's because of those cultural nonsense as well. So it's important as this space grows and develops that going back to data, it's grounded also in those nonsense, in language, in culture, in traditions, and so forth. And equally, this is an opportunity, right? This is not a space that has been solved and we're done moving on. This is a continuous opportunity, and expanding to that, incredibly important. As we talk about accessibility as a whole, also, how do these systems perform online versus offline? We know that a lot of the world is not online all the time, or has constant connectivity. So how do we think of access to technology in a sense of where there is no stable internet connection, or no electricity for that matter that is stable? So even more holistically, of how do we ensure that there is not that digital divide is not growing wider, is also equally important.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think, to kind of piggyback on what you were saying about the data collection, I think we've made a lot of mistakes in our data collection in English that we are then looking to rectify with our data collection elsewhere. So I know there's another project that I'm sort of tangentially involved in that involves capturing voice data from other languages around the world. And one of the things that we're being very particular about when we're doing that is making sure that we're not just collecting news broadcasts, for instance, but that we're actually capturing recording data from real people speaking, people with disabilities speaking, people with different regional dialects speaking, et cetera, so that we make sure that we have a much more representative data set from the get-go. And I think learning those costly lessons from our English data collection will help us to be more efficient as we do move globally to try and create more globally inclusive models.
And we had a real-time feedback in terms of captioning and accuracy of captioning as well. It definitely meant the former, not the latter. But it's fair to say that my accent does sometimes throw a curveball to some of the automatic captioning. So clearly there's still work to be done.
Or it's just all nonsense. I don't know.
I hope not.
No, I'm just kidding. All right. Well, I think that's it for the questions. Thank you, Ioana. Thank you so much to everyone in the audience for bearing with us for this whole hour and listening along. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to either of us at any time, either on LinkedIn or on the socials or what have you. You can find us both pretty easily.
Yes, please do. Echoing that, thank you. And please start looking into this area. I'm biased, but I think it's incredibly cool, incredibly meaningful, and we look forward to learning from you all, either as users or as makers of these technologies. So thank you, Aaron, and thank you, folks, for tuning in today.
Thanks, y'all.